Hi, my name is Morten, and in this video we will be looking at category navigation. So category navigation in Ucommerce is the ability to show the current categories that we have in the catalog right now. And in this particular case, our categories will be featured over here to the left. So this is a partial that has already been put in on the page. We just need to fill in the blanks. So we need to go to our controller that renders this. In this case, it's our category navigation controller. And in here, we will be using the Ucommerce APIs to extract the categories that we need. It can come from many different sources. It can be categories coming from many different catalogs. It can also just be the catalog in categories from the catalog in the context right now. And many other ways. We can decide to show all of them or a subset of them. We can also determine if we want to recursively render them all. It's up to us to define how it should look and feel. Some web shops prefer a big navigation menu, whereas someone else just wants to show the first set of categories, and then as you navigate through, you'll be presented with the individual subcategories afterwards. In this case, we'll keep it as simple as possible so you can learn the concepts and then you can apply your own business requirements afterwards. So in this case, we just have an empty controller, and now we need to use the Ucommerce APIs in order to extract the categories we want to show. In this case, we want to show categories coming from the catalog in the context right now. So we will be looking at some new concepts that has not been introduced in Ucommerce to you yet, unless you already know Ucommerce. So this is also taking everything from the bottom up. So we have categories on the front and in the ends. So let's try to look at some of the components that we actually need in order to fulfill this. In Ucommerce, we base everything that we do on interfaces, which is our way of giving you the ability to later on extend or change the behavior of the APIs. But for now, we will just consume them, and then later on we will teach you how you can work with the infrastructure of Ucommerce to replace parts of the business logic in Ucommerce. The first concept we will be using is a concept called catalog library, which is an interface you can resolve from Ucommerce API. And it gives you the ability to access iCatalog library. And the way that we grab this is by peeking into the IOC container where all the different implementations of all the interfaces has been registered. So you can just grab whatever the IOC has, either the default components or a component that you have modified to your needs. And to access the IOC container, we will be looking at another namespace called ucommerce.infrastructure. And here we have a concept called object factor, which wraps the IOC container. It's a singleton, so I need to grab the instance. Then I can say I want this particular interface, and then the IOC container, which is implemented by Castle Venture, will find the first registered service that implements that interface. More about all this more advanced stuff later on in the masterclass. As I said, right now we're just consuming. So we will consume iCatalog library. And we will also be using another concept called catalog context, which is the underlying components that the libraries here use, or the top level APIs use, in order to figure out what to resolve. So in a little bit, we will say I want the categories without any parents, also known as the root categories. And then the catalog library will be using catalog context in order to resolve those. So we need that as well. again, we're grabbing this from the IC container. There we go. And these are, to begin with, the things that we need. We will use some other concepts in a little bit as well. So now we have the two services here. Now we can just start using them. And the idea behind this MVC stuff is, of course, that we grab whatever data we need and then we transform them into some view models that the front end can understand, which is basically a slimmed down type with just the data that we need. So we need to populate this, and the way that we do it is by mapping the categories. So let's start out by grabbing those. So the concept that we will be getting back here is a concept called a category, which is the search models that drives the APIs to present data on the storefront, placed under this namespace here. And we need a list of those, which is implemented by a specialized list we also provide in the APIs. But this is the model that we will be using. And in order to get those, we will be using catalog library. And here we have a method called get root categories, which gives us a result set. And as you can see here, we can pass in an optional catalog ID. So if we don't specify anything, null will be provided, and then catalog library will be using the catalog context to get the root categories for the current cataloging context right now. So we don't want to specify anything here. And then it's also important that all the APIs of Ucommerce on the storefront will be using pagination. So you don't load everything in one go. So imagine a situation where there's thousands and thousands of root categories underneath a catalog. We have seen that before, even though it's not very common. So in order for you not to tank the performance of the site, we enforce you to use pagination. So if you don't specify anything, we'll just get the first 300 in the context right now. And we could, of course, start implementing all this, which is a little more boilerplate that we need to use, but the concepts are the same. So we'll just assume that we have less than 300, so we get what we need right here. So here we get the root categories, and then we need to map those into some view models that make sense. I have some boilerplate down here already that we can be using. So on our model, we will be setting the list called categories, which will be the roots. We will call map categories, and we will take in our list of categories, and here we can specify the result. So the model here called a result set is basically just a type that has the list of categories from the request that I just made, and then it also has a total count. So we are interested sometimes in showing two different numbers. One, what is the total count? So when we do pagination, we'll say you're now viewing 0 to 300 of 3000, for example. That's the total count, and the result is the list of categories I got back. And here I can also use a count to specify how many I have right now. So we will be calling this, and let's try to map the data. So now we have our categories, and the categories of course has some data that we are interested in showing. Here it's nice to know that when you use and consume the APIs, if you have a multilingual site that are across different languages, then the CMS will determine what is the current language we're looking at right now. Ucommerce will adhere to that and say, okay, then we want to return data in that particular language So everything that you get back here is by default always in the correct language. So you don't have to care about that as a developer when you are actually coding up your front end. So here we have the categories. So let's start to map those. So I'll just do it in a for each. We could of course do it with a link expression as well, but just to keep it simple, let's do good old for each here. We need a list of our category view models, and then we're iterating the categories. And here we are interested in adding in a view model per category. And the categories here have different things that we're interested in. It has a GUID. All objects in Ucommerce has a GUID, which is of course a unique identifier for that particular object, which is part of the index as well. It has a name that we are interested in showing, which is either the internal name or the display name. You're probably interested in the display name because that's what will be localized across your different languages. And then we can do some further complex things here, like categories are a concept that has an infinite deep structure of child categories. So we could start to also render the subcategories for the request here. Let's just skip that for now. But if you wanted to do it, you could use the catalog library to achieve that by calling map categories. And here we would take in the categories that we have for the category we are iterating right now. So get category here has get categories has a list of category IDs passed in. So we could pass in all the GUIDs of the categories in the level we are in right now, and then start to map those up. So notice here in the APIs that we always have GUIDs as references. We don't pass in the actual object, and that's to make it convenient if you have categories configured in the CMS, for example, on the content pages, and you want to do some stuff there, then you don't have to load the category to pass it into the API. You just have the identifier, and then Ucommerce will take care of the rest. But let's save that for a rainy day. So it means that we will now be showing the name on the storefront in just a list of our categories. So what we need to do now is also grab the URL, because in a little bit we will be building up the product listing page, which is basically a page that gives us the current category we will be looking at. In order to do that, we must grab the URL for that category, so Ucommerce will be able to resolve it, and the CMS will be showing the correct content page. So now we actually need a new interface, again from the ISC context. So I will just be putting this up here. And here we want to grab a concept called iURL service, present under ucommerce.search.slugs. This gives you some methods to grab a URL for a piece of data that we pass in. So it will not be using the context, but we will be passing in the context that we have ourselves, coming from the catalog library and from the context. And again, I will be using Object Factory to grab this. So here we have the URL service. And what I can do here now is I can specify the URL that will of course be output on the storefront in our Razor that we're not looking at today. And get URL has a bunch of methods that we can use based on the URL that we actually need. In this case, we will be passing in the catalog in the context right now, so that's why we need to use the context. And then we are passing in a list of categories where it's basically what structure are we in right now, what level are we looking at. In this case, we're just looking at the root categories, so we can just pass in the categories that we have right here. And since we're just iterating this, first level will just be newing up a list with just the one category. But if we are in level 2 or 3 or 4, then all the parent categories would be part of this list, and then this URL service will just combine all the categories into one long URL, so we get the entire context going from the parent category all the way down to the level that we're looking at right now. So we will be passing in the category we are looking at right now. And let's try to take a look at the URL when we build and deploy this to the website. What we actually get based on passing in the current catalog and the list of categories here. In this case, just one. And I actually think that that's it. We don't need to be doing anything else but this. Of course, it can be more or less complex if you have more specific requirements on how you want to present your categories. In this case, we just need the name and the URL, and those will be rendered in a list. So let's try to build the solution and look at the result. And let's fire up the website. So here we have the categories on the storefront. We only have 2, support and software. And if you notice the URL in the bottom, you'll see that it says /Ucommerce/C/software, which is the URL generated for the catalog called Ucommerce and the category called software. More about the URLs later. Of course, when we click this link right now, Umbraco will not recognize this right now. In fact, it will actually try to resolve another URL instead of the one that we're looking at up here, which is Ucommerce C software. It tries to resolve the document that matches a URL called /catalog. This is due to the URL engine that Ucommerce ships with. So let's take a look at that in the next video.